Training for Ventura County. I'm very excited to have you all here. Hold on just 2 seconds. Well, I'll just have to try to remember. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you all and also thank the people who have helped make this possible. Can you hear me okay? So first of all, I would like to thank the League of Women Voters for supporting me on this, venture. And we look forward to more occasions to get together for civil discourse on controversial and difficult issues, both locally and statewide and nationally, to try to find some solutions, common grounds. To do that, we need to know how to actually facilitate a discussion, and that's what we're learning today. I would like to also thank our collaborator, the Channel Islands, Cal State Channel Islands, University, both the Department of Political Science, the Department of Communications, and the Dean of Students. And I'd like to welcome Tony Demoni in the back there. Say thank you to her. You will notice that there are not a lot of students in the audience today. It's because school hasn't started, but we will get them trained by the live videography that's being done today that will be archived by Bob Allen in the back there. Wave, Bob. And you'll be able to find it on kadytv.com, so we'll have a chance to look at it again. I would also like to thank other organizations that have sent representatives here. I think we actually have the president of the AUW from Camarillo, Gloria Mili, in the back there. Thank you, Gloria, for spreading the word and encouraging your members to come. Is there any other organization that I've forgotten to mention? Yes. Oh, we also have AAUW Thousand Oaks here. Strong work. Yes, thank you. I would like to also thank the assistants that are helping Bob videograph this, Aiden and Brian in the back there. They are students that are learning how to do this, and we're very thankful that they've come today to help with us. With that, I think I've said enough, and I would like to now introduce our presenters, Martha Cox and Mary Thompson, who have come up to us from the League of Women Voters in San Diego and North San Diego counties. They are very, very qualified for what we're about to do, so I'm going to turn the mic over to them.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. We are thrilled to be here. What a beautiful campus. What a lovely setting. We just kind of decompressed as we drove onto the campus. It's been a week, so it was like, we're here. It was great. Thank you. As you know, my colleague and co-presenter Mary Thompson and I are members of the League in San Diego, and that's where we got our start. We know that we are among kindred spirits in this room. We can feel your collaborative energy. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you from the university, thank you for welcoming us. We've reviewed your strategic plan and your Center for Community Engagement web pages. So speaking of kindred spirits, we share your passion and we're just so excited for you. Thanks also, even though Betsy has thanked Bob, I certainly want to join her, Mary and I do, in thanking Bob Allen and his superb team to make this available for everybody after the fact. That's great. And for those of you from the League, thank you for setting a standard for collaborative community partnerships. We can speak from experience. It truly is a win-win for everyone. We'd like to add our thanks to everyone who made today possible. Events like this just don't happen. It takes a lot of planning. So, in addition to everyone that Betsy thanked, I would like to thank Betsy Patterson for a superb job. Thanks for your willingness to invest 3 hours with us, for we know everyone has been through a very trying time here of late. All I can say is that Mary and I carry with us the best wishes of the people that we know in San Diego who knew we were going to be here with you today. So we're carrying their good wishes with us. At the outset, let me say that if you came today to get that perfect zinger line for crazy Uncle Fred, because he really got to you over the holidays and you want to be ready for him the next time he starts talking politics, you're probably going to leave disappointed. While crazy Uncle Fred can entertain with his outlandish rhetoric, many of us are not feeling that it's so funny. Our divided states of America are really of concern to so many of us. It's easy for us to feel powerless as individuals when thinking about the current state of our democracy, because it can seem overwhelming in its scope. When we began this work, I remember following a car, and it had a vanity license plate with the letters R-U-I, the letter R again, and the number 8. And I thought, oh my gosh, if people are willing to pay money to express their anger on their license plate, we may be too late in this. It was quite telling, and that was in 2011. So I will leave it up to you to come up with the word that you think might describe the state of our country right now, but for many, it's just plain alarming. Technology. We're just so afraid it's going to take over the world, aren't we? It was working. No. We've been here since 11 and we've tested everything 5 times at least. Okay, great, thanks. Here we go. So, this is what we're going to cover in our time together. It's going to be divided into 2 components. This first segment and then a second segment where you get to be the stars of the show. First, we're going to provide you with a bit of background to lay the groundwork for the second component, when you're going to have the opportunity to have your own deliberative dialogues. Then we'll take a short break, then we'll come back and begin our conversations. But for right now, we're just going to give you a bit of background on the work and what brought us here today. We'll look at what we thought we knew and what's changed. And then just when it seems like all might be lost and we begin thinking about, daydreaming about Canadian citizenship, we'll begin to look at the ways that people around the country are coming together to seek common ground and solutions. For the good news to come out of our current divided states of America is our collaborative realization that democracy is not something we have. It's something we do. And finally, at the end, we'll be happy to take your questions. So what we thought we knew? Well, we thought, if we were honest, that our government worked like so, that somehow when our president and our congressmen were sworn in, that they were somehow sworn in with this superpower of superintelligence about how everything worked, that they possessed the important information to make our government work, that they would know how funding needed to occur, that they would fairly fund all of the various governmental agencies that had been created to serve the public good. We were convinced that America's political system, with its carefully crafted checks and balances, was the envy of the entire world, and that our government provided the rule of law for all of its citizens. We were equally convinced that the work of our government gave rise to innovations that fostered economic and social progress. And in the mid-20th century, those who served in Congress were for the most part held in high esteem. Constituents also, for the most part, were grateful and appreciative for the work being done on their behalf. As citizens of our country, we thought that as long as we did our part by voting and showing up for jury duty,
note taker, and participant. The facilitator's main job is to help everyone have their voices heard. Beginning on page 9, and the handbook contains all the essential skills and tactics and techniques, and they're highlighted here. But the most important element is the facilitator's neutrality, self-awareness, and bias check. There are resources in the back of the handbook that can help with this. The behaviors listed here are good guides to keeping your deliberation group feeling heard and moving forward. One of the first tasks of the group, and you're going to do this today, is to agree upon the conversation rules or group norms for the deliberation. These create a safety net for participants who are unsure about the process. Gaining group buy-in on this first step sets a tone for the rest of the conversation. The agreed upon rules can be referenced by the facilitator and the note taker, or all the members of the group, if the conversation gets off track. This is an example of some norms that are commonly used, but you can make up your own. Your groups will make up your own. But here's a hint. The fewer simple rules are better than an exhaustive list. Here's the big picture of the steps the facilitator will use. Part of the welcoming is to ensure that everyone is seated, ideally groups of 6 to 10, so everyone can see each other, just as you are today. After participants are settled and welcome, the facilitator invites participants to introduce themselves using the one-breath method. And this is just like it sounds. Introductions can be as long as a person can speak without taking a second breath. That kind of limits it down. We've already talked about the importance of getting the group's buy-in on a set of rules. Next, participants describe their stake in an issue, why it's important to them. The facilitator begins the deliberation by revisiting the choices or the options under consideration, and then uses leading questions and facilitation techniques to draw out the ideas of the group, searching for common ground for action, or identifying what conflicts must be worked through. As the discussion gets underway, the theory of group dynamics comes into play. On page 12, you'll see a sketch of the 3 phases groups experience: divergent thinking, the groan zone, and convergent thinking. In the first phase, divergent thinking, people brainstorm and are exposed to ideas outside of their own thinking. In the next phase, known as the groan zone, people struggle to integrate others' ideas into their own. You'd think it should be simple to sift through ideas, but in practice, this part is often tough. Everyone has their own unique frame of reference and communications can break down easily. The defining work of the grown zone is to understand one another's perspective and build a shared framework of understanding. Hearing the stories of people you don't agree with seems to open people up to one another. It is this phase, the grown zone, where facilitators are so important, keeping the group working to find common ground, or the things that they can live with. Rushing through the grown zone to convergent thinking can cause premature consensus, which may not be sustainable in the work ahead to implement the group's ideas. Next, after movement through the divergent thinking, the grown zone, and to convergent thinking, there's a need to end the deliberation and come to a decision point. This point is key because it moves the group from thinking to acting. There are techniques and procedures to come to this point described on page 13 in the handbook. Perhaps the group decided in advance how decisions will be made. That's great. But in the absence of that, the facilitator can end the discussion, write a proposal on the flip chart, poll the group members, and to assess the level of support for the proposal, and then direct the decision to perhaps the key person, or to decide that the group should continue to discuss further, perhaps in a subgroup. Finally, the facilitator asks for the group's reflections and perhaps helps the group to move toward action with the results of the deliberation. This is the time to ask everyone to consider, can you live with this? How has your thinking changed from where you started? The note-taker, another key role. Working in concert with the facilitator to ensure that the essential elements of the discussion are documented. Just as the facilitator plays an impartial role, not sharing their opinions, so does the note-taker. Note-takers record the group norms and agreements initially, and then they capture the nuggets of the discussion. All comments and suggestions, trade-offs that arise, and ideas leading to common ground. They do so without attribution to the speaker, but they confirm for all participants that they're being heard and that their opinions are equally valued. The guidelines for note takers are identified in your handbook on page 14, but for now, consider these. Note takers listen for the essence of the comment. We're not looking for a verbatim transcript. They stop and clarify the conversation if further understanding is needed. And I mean really stop it, including the facilitator. It's like, hold on. They write legibly in plain block letters, closing the gaps in letters such as P, B, or D, so all words are clearly understood. They alternate marker colors for each speaker. Just a couple are all that's necessary, just so they're alternating and all run together. They don't duplicate a comment. Simply add an asterisk or a check to the original comment so that it's clear that it's a view that's shared by many people. As seasoned league members, these guidelines are fairly standard, but what elevates the task a bit is the collaboration between the facilitator and the note-taker, working in concert to produce a transparent record of the conversation and for all to ensure the accuracy and clarification. That's it about note takers. So we're going to take time for some questions now. We're going to have a brief break, and then we're going to come back to your same table and get to work. But a couple of questions before we launch into the next segment. Sure.
I've been working with a collaborative group for a year and a half on issues relating to farm workers. And one of the things I noticed on page 7 was a experience with that group is that it started with significant distrust. And the first process that we had to go through was to address that and talk very frankly with each other to see if we could move through it. And so it wasn't a deal breaker, it was just the underlying need as a precursor.
Is that the topic of the first session, perhaps?
First and second.
Wow.
Is that not commonly necessary?
Distrust, yeah, it's in the water. No, I think some things where the sides are so polarized and there's just, the deal has already been cut, I think that's definitely a red flag. What it sounds like you guys are able to do is overcome in a wonderful way, the fundamental reason for the problem.
Question?
What was the question?
Oh, you couldn't hear it. I'm sorry. The question was, isn't it important to address distrust before you launch into the issue?
Everyone hear that? Her question, which was, she found that could be a stumbling block, but in fact it was the essential building block to address that.
And the question was, how do you begin to work with a group when everyone is distrustful of the other? How do you build trust? And so one of the things, Mary has identified it beautifully, but one of the hardest things, especially with groups that have kind of been far apart or at war with each other, is building trust. And that could be a series of meetings all by itself, just so that everyone feels comfortable to be in the same room at different tables to be able to talk to each other. In some neighborhoods, some communities, there have been well-meaning groups that have showed up and they came a couple of times, parachuted in, we've got the answer to all your problems, and they never see them again. So there's a level of distrust that is almost inherent in some of these right from the get-go. So building trust and building the relationship is really a crucial factor in this.
Is there another question at table one?
I was just going to make a comment that I worked at Kaiser for 31 years, and my last 20 years, because things weren't going well with union
and obeying the laws set forth by our government, that we had achieved what our founding fathers had envisioned for our republic. For in the 20th century, the legitimacy of governments was based on the rule of law and people's right to vote. Was this perception a reality or a myth? Let's take an early look. The truth is that we have had our differences from the beginning, since the days of Jamestown and Plymouth. In fact, the colonists who founded our country came in waves from distinct areas of Europe and other countries, bringing their own culture and their beliefs with them. They viewed each other as competitors, even enemies, for land, for people, for capital. And only when they were threatened as a single unit did they come together to win the revolution. However, it's been a fragile existence from the beginning. In his book, American Nations, A History of the 11 Rival Regional Cultures of North America, Colin Woodward details the characteristics and motivations of each of the rival nations. This map comes from his book. The cherished principles of each founding culture often contradicted one another. Some championed individualism, utopian social reform, and a variety of freedoms which we take for granted today. Others championed equality in education and democratic participation, and still others maintained a deference to an aristocratic order. Many scholars contend that some version of these cultural elements are still present to this day. And in fact, following last year's election, a currently serving congressman said to his staff the morning after, "We live in the same country we always did. We just know it better now." So when we got started, we've been thinking about this for some time. We've been watching the town hall forums in 2009 in the summer, and our interest was piqued on, we need to do something. We're the League of Women Voters. We need to do something. And if we were feeling, if we'd always been divided, why were we feeling now that things were so bad? What has happened and what changed the trajectory? Well, the impetus for our initial work began on January 8th, 2011 with the Tucson shootings, and we've explained that in your handbook. We didn't know at the time, but it was a pivotal moment for many other organizations across the country as well. The lady on the right is Dr. Carolyn Lukensmeyer, and she's the executive director of the National Institute for Civil Discourse. Of course, you know the lady on the left is former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who's become spokeswoman for the National Institute. Dr. Lukensmeyer has been a friend and a colleague in all of our work. Once we began our study, we found that we were not alone in our thinking about rising incivility. Study after study, and book after book, confirmed the startling facts that we've been surmising all along. That Americans believe that incivility has risen to crisis levels. That our country is losing stature as a civil nation in our global community. And that our country is falling behind other developing nations because of our inability to work together to get things done. Before fake news became the latest buzz phrase, we were learning about the related aspects of this issue, that we've created our own echo chambers of self-selected facts from our own self-selected news sources. And by doing so, we lack the opportunity for real discussion of issues. With our self-inflicted polarized isolation, our views tend to become more galvanized. We find ourselves intolerant of views that do not align with our own. And here's an interesting perspective from a high school student who wrote about civility last spring. Surrounding ourselves with only those who mimic our thinking and do not challenge our beliefs is dangerous. If we become too comfortable in our own dialogue, we may begin to believe it's the only one that exists. Even worse, we may come to believe it is the only view that matters. We were beginning to understand a basic concept about conducting civil conversations, and that was listening, the importance of listening. It sounds so easy, but listening respectfully with curiosity to those with whom you do not agree is hard, for we've all got hidden biases. And as the saying goes, we're all tattooed in our cradles with the beliefs of our tribe. Interestingly enough, many people's perception of achieving civility is somehow convincing others of our opinions without raising the decibel level, because of course we have the right answers. We've studied the issues. And if it gets loud, we rationalize these people are so ill-informed. They just refuse to accept our perfectly astute analysis of the situation. We were beginning to come to the realization that even though we think we have the answers, maybe we have some listening to do as well. While we found our first year of study enlightening, we knew we were only skimming the surface. In making presentations to various community groups during this time period, our audiences were asking for more. They mirrored the feelings of many of the Americans we were reading about. They sensed something was very wrong with our democracy, and their trust in government was at an all-time low. They didn't just want to have their suspicions confirmed by us that we were divided. They wanted to know what we were going to do about it. Our direction came into focus when we held our own forum, What Kind of Talk Does Democracy Need? And at that forum, we met Dr. Martine Carcassonne, a communications professor at Colorado State University and director of CSU's Center for Public Deliberation. He happened to be a faculty member of the Kettering Foundation's Center for Public Life. And he invited us to apply for the upcoming 2014-15 cohort to secure training as deliberative dialogue facilitators. 10 of us were selected from San Diego, and this shows you the breakdown of the folks who attended. A year-long cohort consists of 20 faculty members from colleges and universities from across the country, chosen in pairs to represent their institution. Because of our numbers, we were an experiment. Our training at the Kettering Foundation in Dayton, Ohio opened our eyes and broadened our horizons. We believed that the process of deliberation would open new doors for the San Diego leagues and leagues across the country. We also believed that our missions and our approaches to research made us compatible partners. The icing on the cake was when we learned that one of the accreditation requirements for colleges and universities these days is community engagement. It was an alliance already formed. We saw this as an opportunity to engage with our colleges and universities and together better serve our communities. I'm now going to turn the mic over to Mary, who's going to continue with our story.
Thanks, Martha. As she described, our study of civil discourse leading to action in the form of deliberative dialogue or deliberative democracy is what brought us here today. It's based in the belief in citizen problem solving. Our hope for a result with deliberative dialogue is for people to have a deeper understanding of an issue, to gain more definitive beliefs on how to address an issue, and to be more likely to take political action to bring about desired change. In a word, our goal was to cause people to care. As Martha mentioned, along the way, we were influenced by mentors and practitioners who continue to bring new tools and insights to the work. And a word about the packets that are on your table. There's a lot of paperwork there. In that packet, there's a full blue sheet, which is a list of resources. We learned the fundamentals of political problem solving and what makes some problems so hard and how difficult it is to truly hear others' ideas. This first one, adversarial form of problem solving, makes the headlines and can oversimplify the wicked problems in our society. When we assess our problems hastily, perhaps fueled by misinformation and emotional biases, we're likely to see only opposites, leading to unproductive debate. The inevitable tensions and the necessity for trade-offs are never recognized. The expert form of problem solving can lull us into an over-reliance on data or facts or laws which no longer satisfy emerging or wicked problems. In fact, we're no longer as deferential as we once were to expertise and authority. And our own access through the internet makes us believe we're experts ourselves. The collaborative form of problem solving taps into the people's capacity, not in abstract debates, but issue by issue, to decide what they are or aren't willing to do as citizens, weighing trade-offs based on their values. This third method of problem solving gets to the heart of deliberative dialogue. While adversarial politics sets up a win-lose confrontation, which leaves the losing side angry and looking for retribution, the collaborative, deliberative process engages citizens as partners. We're all familiar with what a wicked problem feels like. It's a situation where there's no perfect solution, but to move forward toward trade-offs need to be made. You probably make these kinds of tough choices in your personal life all the time. Wicked problems are characterized by interconnected, competing values. There's no clear solution. And wicked problems ask a lot of us, maybe to change our own set point on what we fundamentally believe, or at least to find ways to adapt and find solutions that work for perhaps the greater good. In fact, our founding documents contain the kinds of tensions that characterize wicked problems. The highlighted words, the ones in yellow, these are all words that we cherish, but in the history of our democracy, some of these words, or the ideas behind them, require us to make trade-offs. For example, take common defense and liberty. How are we to reconcile personal freedom or liberty alongside the notion of common defense, where the common good requires participation of all? To give you an idea of the tension around value-based ideas, take a look at these ideals. I don't know if you can read these clearly. First of all, equality, safety and security, freedom, prosperity for you, prosperity for future generations. If you had to pick just one as your highest ideal, what would it be? I'm not going to ask for questions now. Think to yourself, please. Did you find it hard to choose? It gets harder. Now, think about what is the least important ideal to you. Which one of these could you get rid of? When choices are based on values or ideals, the decision is hard. Listening to others describe the choices they make or what it is in their story that causes them to make a choice can expand your thinking, to consider new information, and cause you to care more about an idea or an issue going forward. This realization on why public problems are so intractable and why they need deep discussion by the community draws us to the process of deliberative dialogue. As Martha said, the League's practical hands-on mission of making democracy works fits. We bring people together. Our founding value is voter or citizen education, and we're good at it. After we completed our first waves of study about civil discourse, our action was to bring deliberative dialogue, deliberative democracy to our community. The hands-on guide we'll use today is a sort of cookbook on how to do it in your community. And the workbooks are on your table. You might have downloaded them yourself. Beginning on page 6, the handbook is intended to help guide you in thinking about and planning for such structured, intentional conversations. But here's a caveat. The purpose of deliberation is not to push citizens toward one viewpoint, but rather to help them formulate their own views. So first, the what. There's an art to selecting issues best suited for deliberation and dialogue. That's shown on page 7, talking about the attributes of ripeness for deliberation or problems or red flags that suggest that deliberations may not have an impact on an issue. Those might be those kinds of issues that have a zero-sum, there's a conflict, that stakeholders already prefer the status quo. It's an uphill battle. Once the issue is named or identified, it needs research. People's views about an issue are the best place to start by simply surveying, asking a wide range of people what concerns them about an issue. The larger the number and diversity of people surveyed, the better the research. In your packet, there's a green sheet, is a sample of the survey form that was used when we worked on the guide we're going to use today in deliberation. Conducting surveys allows reaching a diverse audience for your eventual forum or discussion, and maybe even finding collaborative partners that will help co-sponsor an event with you. Be patient. This is a process that takes time for citizens to build trust. The League is already ahead in this capacity because we do already collaborate, and the wonderful collaboration between the university and the Ventura League is a good example, and AAUW is another really clear example. Fortified with people's views, framing can now be done to collect and organize what you've heard into possible options, digging underneath the responses to find people's underlying values, what they truly care about. The result of the framing ends up in an issue or a discussion guide, which is organized around the question of what should we do? Intentionality is important. Good discussion guides seek to find the tensions between and among the possible options. And now, the who. With a named, framed, and constructed discussion guide, you're ready to consider the participants. Of course, the most likely are the people who might be affected by the problem. Here, the focus is on the public, regular citizens, and when I use this term, I'm talking about all the residents in a community. I want to aim for as much diversity as possible, whether the issue is within a neighborhood, a community, or a region. Invitees should also include community groups or professionals who are now actively engaged with the issue or who should be. They can often bring the most valuable perspectives that you forgot to ask about. Getting policymakers to the table is crucial, and they also recognize the benefit of getting public input ahead of a decision, because that increases the likelihood whatever decisions are made will be more accepted more widely by the public. Finally, the forum will include facilitators and note-takers, and we're going to talk a lot more about that role in a bit. The third ingredient is when. Details on the logistics of a forum itself are important to attract the diversity and turnout that is needed to make a difference. When and where should the event be held? Public transportation available? Will childcare or translators be needed? And depending on the time of day, should there be food? And the answer to that is always yes. And will the location provide the optimum room setup, such as the one we're in here now? So our training today is focused on deliberation, but at times you may be called upon to facilitate other types of forums. And it's important to clearly define the expectations for everyone. Is the forum being held to provide the attendees with information only for a better understanding of an issue? Is the forum intended to gather community input that might be submitted in the form of a report to an agency? Will the forum include policymakers to move the discussion into action? Or is the forum one of a series on an issue that includes all of the above? So up until now, my remarks have been about preparing for deliberation. Now let's shift the actual role of making up a deliberative dialogue and the roles that you are going to experience today. In our exercise, you're going to have a chance to assume each of the roles in a deliberation: facilitator, note taker, and participant. The facilitator's main job is to help everyone have their voices heard. Beginning on page 9, and the handbook contains all the essential skills and tactics and techniques, and they're highlighted here. But the most important element is the facilitator's neutrality, self-awareness, and bias check. There are resources in the back of the handbook that can help with this. The behaviors listed here are good guides to keeping your deliberation group feeling heard and moving forward. One of the first tasks of the group, and you're going to do this today, is to agree upon the conversation rules or group norms for the deliberation. These create a safety net for participants who are unsure about the process. Gaining group buy-in on this first step sets a tone for the rest of the conversation. The agreed upon rules can be referenced by the facilitator and the note taker, or all the members of the group, if the conversation gets off track. This is an example of some norms that are commonly used, but you can make up your own. Your groups will make up your own. But here's a hint. The fewer simple rules are better than an exhaustive list. Here's the big picture of the steps the facilitator will use. Part of the welcoming is to ensure that everyone is seated, ideally groups of 6 to 10, so everyone can see each other, just as you are today. After participants are settled and welcome, the facilitator invites participants to introduce themselves using the one breath method. And this is just like it sounds. Introductions can be as long as a person can speak without taking a second breath. That kind of limits it down. We've already talked about the importance of getting the group's buy-in on a set of rules. Next, participants describe their stake in an issue, why it's important to them. The facilitator begins the deliberation by revisiting the choices or the options under consideration, and then uses leading questions and facilitation techniques to draw out the ideas of the group, searching for common ground for action, or identifying what conflicts must be worked through. As the discussion gets underway, the theory of group dynamics comes into play. On page 12, you'll see a sketch of the 3 phases groups experience: divergent thinking, the groan zone, and convergent thinking. In the first phase, divergent thinking, people brainstorm and are exposed to ideas outside of their own thinking. In the next phase, known as the groan zone, people struggle to integrate others' ideas into their own. You'd think it should be simple to sift through ideas, but in practice, this part is often tough. Everyone has their own unique frame of reference, and communications can break down easily. The defining work of the groan zone is to understand one another's perspective and build a shared framework of understanding. Hearing the stories of people you don't agree with seems to open people up to one another. It is this phase, the groan zone, where facilitators are so important, keeping the group working to find common ground, or the things that they can live with. Rushing through the groan zone to convergent thinking can cause premature consensus, which may not be sustainable in the work ahead, to implement the group's ideas. Next, after movement through the divergent thinking, the growing zone, and to convergent thinking, there's a need to end the deliberation and come to a decision point. This point is key because it moves the group from thinking to acting. There are techniques and procedures to come to this point described on page 13 in the handbook. Perhaps the group decided in advance how decisions will be made. That's great. But in the absence of that, the facilitator can end the discussion, write a proposal on the flip chart, poll the group members, and to assess the level of support for the proposal, and then direct the decision to perhaps a key person, or to decide that the group should continue to discuss further, perhaps in a subgroup. Finally, the facilitator asks for the group's reflections and perhaps helps the group to move toward action with the results of the deliberation. This is the time to ask everyone to consider, can you live with this? How has your thinking changed from where you started? The note taker, another key role. Working in concert with the facilitator to ensure that the essential elements of the discussion are documented, just as the facilitator plays an impartial role, not sharing their opinions, so does the note taker. Note takers record the group norms and agreements initially, and then they capture the nuggets of the discussion, all comments and suggestions, trade-offs that arise, and ideas leading to common ground. They do so without attribution to the speaker, but they confirm for all participants that they're being heard and that their opinions are equally valued. The guidelines for note takers are identified in your handbook on page 14, but for now, consider these. Note takers listen for the essence of the comment. We're not looking for a verbatim transcript. They stop and clarify the conversation if further understanding is needed. And I mean really stop it, including the facilitator. It's like, hold on. They write legibly in plain block letters, closing the gaps in letters such as P, B, or D, so all words are clearly understood. They alternate marker colors for each speaker. Just a couple are all that's necessary, just so they're alternating and all run together. They don't duplicate a comment. Simply add an asterisk or a check to the original comment so that it's clear that it's a view that's shared by many people. As seasoned league members, these guidelines are fairly standard, but what elevates the task a bit is the collaboration between the facilitator and the note taker, working in concert to produce a transparent record of the conversation and for all to ensure the accuracy and clarification. That's it about note takers. So we're going to take time for some questions now. We're going to have a brief break, and then we're going to come back to your same table and get to work. But a couple of questions before we launch into the next segment. Sure.
I've been working with a collaborative group for a year and a half on issues relating to farm workers. And one of the things I noticed on page 7 is the red flag is significant distress. My experience with that group is that it started with significant distrust. And the first process that we had to go through was to address that and talk very frankly with each other to see if we could move through it. And so it wasn't a deal breaker, it was just the underlying need as a precursor.
Is that the topic of the first session, perhaps?
First and second.
Wow.
Is that not commonly
Distrust, yeah, it's in the water. No, I think some things where the sides are so polarized and there's just, the deal has already been cut. I think that's definitely a red flag. What it sounds like you guys are able to do is overcome in a wonderful way, the fundamental reason for the problem.
Question?
What was the question?
Oh, you couldn't hear it. I'm sorry. The question was, isn't it important to address distrust before you launch into the issue?
Everyone hear that? Her question, which was, she found that could be a stumbling block, but in fact it was the essential building block to address that.
And the question was, how do you begin to work with a group when everyone is distrustful of the other? How do you build trust? And so one of the things, Mary has identified it beautifully, but one of the hardest things, especially with groups that have kind of been far apart or at war with each other, is building trust. And that could be a series of meetings all by itself, just so that everyone feels comfortable to be in the same room at different tables to be able to talk to each other. In some neighborhoods, some communities, there have been well-meaning groups that have showed up and they came a couple of times, parachuted in, we've got the answer to all your problems, and they never see them again. So there's a level of distrust that is almost inherent in some of these right from the get-go. So building trust and building the relationship is really a crucial factor in this. The grid has 6 columns. The first column in each option is for the possible actions to be taken. The second column is for writing down those drawbacks or trade-offs for that particular option. So if someone wants to make a point about the option 2 presentation, write it under the option 2 possible action. Don't just make a long list in one column, and you'll understand why when you get to the closure part, the going through the growing zone, because you'll be getting very creative, and you want to be able to see where each action and trade-off fits.
So the trade-offs is where the zone.
But yeah, we're not gonna do this yet.
Okay, so we're still on that.
Just a minute, the action.
So Judy stated how she felt,
all 3 approaches.
but then you didn't really have an action
You
yet.
are encouraged to add your role-playing persona if this helps the discussion move along. You will have 15 minutes in this segment. Ready to begin?
Okay, back to Judy's persona.
Sorry, any questions? Now that you're seeing the pros,
I know.
Ready? Yes.
What we did with the
That is on your table assignment, the reverse is your alternate persona. If in table discussions a possible action is not presented that your person might want to say, hey, I think we should do this because in my neighborhood this happens, add that to the discussion.
Karen, maybe you want to be a counselor.
No.
You like your conflict stuff?
I have never been in that.
Okay.
Never pass up that chance.
All right, ready to begin.
What do you think, Karen, that you would, of my program, to provide clean needles? Is that something
So that's one of
that
her
you would
options,
do?
is clean needles.
Well,
It's this one.
It wouldn't be a bad idea, but that
would you use them? Would you come and
continual
yourself?
drug using, and if you're trying to keep people from using the drugs, I think something in conjunction with clean needles has to be instituted.
So, like, maybe you're saying you get a clean needle and then you get arrested?
No.
Oh.
Like there's a program
That
such
might
as
encourage
if you come into that you end up in
use.
You went within the justice system, and in order to help you come off, I know actually they had the clean needle program in Los Angeles, and I really don't know how that worked. I really don't know what they did. They didn't address them. I guess they had a source for clean needles so that the disease wouldn't be rampant. That's the purpose.
Right.
That's not a drug, what do you call it? A way to continue to have people clean up, but it was a way to keep people from getting AIDS. So it's really a different purpose.
So clean needles can also keep people safe? Is that what you're saying?
This is people who don't do drugs safe.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And
I
the
think
people that
what
do, because they share needs.
Well, yeah. So
Okay,
it would. So clean needles can be used for both, for also keeping people safe.
So, so I'm a small business owner, and with substance abuse prevalent in our communities, I'm really concerned about how that can affect my employees or future employees, because I do need people to be reliable and not pose any type of other risk or a problem at work. So, for example, if I had an employee, they were a user, they would get clean needles, and then expanding on what you were proposing as maybe in conjunction with something else, like they got clean needles, then they would be in a rehab program. Maybe that kind of marry those two. You get the clean needles, but we do want you to come into rehab. Would that be a requirement where there would not be a punitive aspect to that? Where you get the clean needle, you're in the clean needle program, then you can get rehab services to kind of come off of and address the issues of substance abuse. Is that?
It would make sense to have it be educational, but if I'm coming in for a clean needle, I'm clearly going to shoot up.
Right.
And you're not ready for rehab.
And I think that it shouldn't be a must-have. Like if you're going to come in here, you have to go to rehab. It has to be an option that they have available to them.
So rehab is an option?
Rehab and education, I think I heard.
A problem with the business is it's not necessarily your employees, but it's who is hanging around outside and what danger they pose. But I think for clean needles, you want to keep health conditions correct, in check. But for rehab, you can't make someone go through rehab if they don't want to, and if they are distraught over whatever the issue is. How do you pull them in to counsel them, to get them to seek out assistance? That's the hard part. I would, and from a high school counselor standpoint, you are dealing with children with home problems.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, and their friends and peer pressure. So how do you, combat that type of an issue?
Seems like we have to have parent education programs and quality health care and all sorts of insulate these families where drug abuse is rampant. So by creating all sorts of social networks that prevent drug abuse from beginning.
I don't think it's an abuse. When you think of where the opioid problem came from, it came from the medicine chests of parents for kids, but also the parents have become addicted. They're the ones that have the problem. The kids may learn from them, but problem for parent education, they have to participate, and there's no law or no requirement that says you must learn about these things, you must come in and talk to us. And if it's voluntary, chances of getting them to come in is really slim to none.
That's a trade-off, right?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, as a note taker, I want to know what you're asking, what we can do. Are you saying, what is the action? Is this to keep people safe? You want them to have education? Is it that as substance abuse users, you don't want to force them to have education? Or I'm not sure I understand your point.
I'm saying parent education is wonderful, they're excellent, but the participation level is generally very low if it comes through the schools.
I think that becomes a trade-off. like, I think just facilitation-wise, there's an action and then there's a trade-off for that action, and that feels like yes, we could, preparing for education is like an action, and then a trade-off is, oh, but they won't participate.
Well, so that's upholding individual freedom then, isn't it? That how do you get people to participate?
You'd have limited participation. I'll tell you from my experience having been a counselor.
I'm sorry, it's a trade-off
of education, right? It's that, people won't, requires too much time and money and requires too much personal responsibility.
If I may speak, I'm a community police officer. And as a police officer, that I think there needs to be consequences for action, whether the pills come out of the medicine cabinet or they come off the street and are sold on a corner, that the person who buys and the person who sells, the person who has the medicine in the cabinet and is available to the child who grabs it, they're all criminals, and they need to be addressed by the law. And that there are laws that keep people safe, and we need to uphold those laws.
Then we could wind up with a lot of full prisons.
That's a trade-off, right?
And
that is a trade-off, but
So
as a police officer, we need to uphold the laws.
enforce the laws.
How about that? Okay, thank you.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just to, municipal community police officer, just to expand on how you feel there should be some punitive action for those people that abuse these drugs and use these drugs. What about the providers of the drugs?
What about the what?
The providers of these drugs. The overprescribing of medications by medical professionals. Not only that, the manufacturers of these drugs, the insurance companies that allow for the quantity of these drugs to be prescribed and made available to the public, which I believe is really in excess of what...
That may be, but I am a police officer, and there is a law, and there
you concentrated on one or two options for both actions and trade-offs. Just plow through the best you can. Some of the tables assumed a 5-minute timetable, self-imposed, for each option discussion. So however you like to do it, we trust you. So in this segment, in segment 3, person number 5 will assume the role of facilitator. Person number 6 will assume the role of a note taker. You'll be assuming the same roles, leading the discussion, noting all the exceptions, noting and tying to elements that have already been noted. So you're beginning the discussion of how this all evolves. Feel free to refer to the fact sheet. We encourage you to do that. You're asked to consider and explain your positions and keep going on that role play. We're really proud of you. You've got 15 minutes for this segment. Any questions? All right, begin.
You get graded before you start. Once they get caught, they go to court. But there's this idea of being we talked about what we can do, the theory, and action. It's an action they protecting citizens. One was protecting citizens and consequences. So
drive and all of that stuff. You know, we have a police department, we have a court system. What else? Is there anything else? Yeah, and all right. Well, that's
This segment is concluded. All right, we are now moving on to segment 4. This is probably going to be the most challenging part of the discussion, but also the most valuable. For segment 4, we're zeroing in on the possible path to action. Person number 7 will assume the role of facilitator, and person number 8 will be the note taker. If you do not have a person 7 or 8 at your table, please continue the rotation. You understand that we're trying to give everybody an opportunity to participate in these roles, so thank you for being your own good administrators in this. Facilitators, in segment 4, you're going to guide your group through the groan zone. And if you want to revisit the groan zone, it's on page 6 in your slide handout notes. What your job is in this segment is to ask the participants if they see a path to action as they weigh all the options and the trade-offs, or if they need more information to make a decision. If your group feels it needs more information to come to any kind of consensus, please note what kind of information would help you move forward. That's important to note. Facilitators play a key role in this segment, urging everyone to make sure their points are considered, but being fully aware not to conclude too soon. Generally, when that's the case, it means we haven't really equally considered all the options and the trade-offs yet. We've come to consensus too soon. Everybody's in agreement. It means we don't have as many diverse voices at the table that we need. Note takers, in this segment, you can use your creativity to capture any new actions and trade-offs that have not been mentioned, and then to use your creative skills in this fashion, because what you're doing with your notes in this segment at this point is tying pieces together. Oh, we liked that part of that option, but look at the trade-off that we noted over here. How are those two things reconciled? So this is where your different thoughts in different colors and drawing lines and making circles and drawing arrows really helps you, Please, if this doesn't look like yours, don't be hard on yourself. This is a skill that is learned. Please understand that it is a skill to be learned. Learning the process, learning the different roles, and then making it work. So please don't be hard on yourselves. Just enjoy this part and work through this next segment of the groan zone. You'll have 15 minutes for this segment. All right, you're already groaning. I don't know. At this point in a forum that you would conduct, you would take time for table reflections and then move into group reflections. We've asked a lot of you this afternoon, and you've risen to the occasion admirably. You've had great discussions around your table. We are so really pleased for you because you've got great energy and great intelligence in this room. We guided you through 3 possible options to solve a problem. But we indicated at the beginning, these are just 3 beginning approaches. They're not the only approaches. There are many ways to skin a cat. And you're finding different ways to skin a cat. Congratulations. That's great. Because what happens through this is that generally groups come together and realize, you know, I really like this segment of number 1, but I kind of like this element in number 2, and oh, look at that in number 3, and you form your own solution. You've been doing that already. Congratulations. What also happens is that in many of these forums, we kind of pulled a little fast one on you because it's training and we're trying to get you exposed to as much of this in a time frame that we can fit into it. But generally what happens in segment 1, you'd be talking about just option 1, both the actions to be taken and the resulting trade-offs right at that time. But what we found is that people are looking ahead. They're saying, but I like number 2. I don't even want to talk about this one. So for our purposes, we thought this is a much better approach to allow you to look at all 3 options and consider all 3 options as actions at the same time, and the trade-offs for all 3 options at the same time. But you have a choice. So it really depends on how you wanted to structure a forum that you were planning. So I'm just mentioning that. What we're asking you to do in this segment, and again, you now know where we're headed, so someone who has not had the opportunity to facilitate, we are asking you to serve as facilitator, and the same thing for note taker, someone who has not had the opportunity to be a note taker at your table. What we're asking you to reflect on are the 4 bullet points under segment 5 on your pink exercise sheet. That's what we're asking you to consider right now. Note takers, if your table group needs time to reflect, feel free to read back anything that they need reviewed. And also, what we're asking of you is, at the time you're doing this, please pull up your blue satisfaction survey. Because if there are items that arise and it's like, did we explain this well enough? How could we have made this easier? Help us. We're continuing to fine-tune and refine how we're doing this based on the feedback we get. We're learning with you as well. And so please, we would really appreciate that. So you have 15 minutes for this segment. First of all, you had a basic idea of a basic premise for your forum. Was this intended to be an informational forum for your community? Did a city council person from a certain district request that you gather people to get a consensus for a decision that needs to be made? Or are you empowered as various organizations and community groups to propose your own action for submission to a city council or an organization? So you need to know this premise going in, and that will help you determine what your action is as the forum concludes. It may look something like this. So for instance, when conducting your own forums, you have choices at this juncture. Some of them are covered on page 13 in the handbook, but this goes back to your original intent. You may wish to have all of your tables post their table notes on the wall and have given everybody 2 dots in advance like we do in League, and then everybody uses their 2 dots judiciously. They vote for the 2 best actions or the most successful, possibly successful actions that they support. That's one way to go. The other way to go, or another way to go, is to have a second large group facilitator who has an easel pad here and will go around to each table and say, what's your top proposal and what are the trade-offs you see? So that it forces each table to really zero in on what is the most important thing that in solving this problem that our table has come up with. So then everyone's table final assessment is recorded, and then the group votes and you find consensus that way. If at the end you're still struggling and boy, there's still more to go, or you know, we didn't have enough information presented to us, we really want to know this and this and this, then at that point you may reconvene, you may appoint a subcommittee to come back and report, or someone may be designated to, okay, I'm hearing what I'm hearing, I'm drafting this proposal, what does everybody think? And so there are different methods for bringing everything to conclusion, but the closure and reflection piece is really important and it really takes time. What we've tried to do with our trainings here is submit to you the process for conducting these, and in so doing, what we've done is what you would do in planning your own forum. We have sent electronic materials in advance, the issue guide and the facilitation guide, so that you would have that and have the opportunity to read it before coming in, so you wouldn't be coming in cold. When you're trying to solve a community problem, you definitely want to do that. You definitely want to get the information out to people in advance because you want them to come in with background, with agreed upon facts, and they're ready to really dive into the issue at hand. In our case, and we are so glad for so many people who just at the last minute, my schedule opened up, I could come, and you haven't had a chance to read all of the material that we sent out in advance. So you're walking in, and we're so glad you're here. Thank you also to the spouses who came in and so graciously allowed us to split you up. Families, we allowed to split you up. I think you're understanding why we wanted to do that and why it's so important, because you want the diversity of opinions around the table. It really makes a difference. So when you're bringing things to conclusion, you've really got a lot to weigh, and we don't always hit the mark. Sometimes things will surface and we realize, you know what? Really should have had that group in. They would have added another good voice. It gets easier as you go on and frankly, as you build trust with the various communities within your community, it's going to be easier. It's going to take time, but you've got just a great nucleus of people here with the League, with the university, with your AAUW, with the other group that's here, and the others that you've reached out to. I mean, you've done a phenomenal job. And so you are groups where there is built-in trust already. So it's just finding what's the issue at hand and who would that affect the most. We need to hear from them. So that's how we proceed at this point. So we have a few minutes, and we're just going to go around the room very quickly to try to get a sense of your general reflections. Mary will be our Vanna White, and so we'd just like to know how you felt it went, what your takeaways were. Did you learn anything or that you hadn't considered before, and now you're thinking about things in a different way? So just any general takeaway, just a quick takeaway.
So we've decided that as different a group we were at the table, our foundation was pretty similar and solid. We focused on the social issues. Certainly funding of programs, etc., was extremely important and a big problem. We realized in just about everything that we came up with in terms of possible solutions. And I guess that's about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Mary, over here in the front.
I hope I'm talking for the group, but I feel that we've come to a sense that we can only solve this problem within our community, and that all the information about everybody else out there doesn't really help us until we know what is really going on in our community. And so we realized that we needed much more information, much more discourse, and much more stories, personal stories on how drug abuse affects everyone in our community, our community.
Anyone else?
Our table decided that we could have had a little bit less paperwork and a little bit more time on task. So that was one of the suggestions that we've made. And also the other thing that was said was, before we can start deliberating with communities, we have to learn to deliberate with ourselves, our families, and learn the skills of conversation as opposed necessarily to this level of deliberation. So this would be like a step 2, and we should have had a step 1 first, which was how you talk to people about things.
Thank you. Great comments. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, we had the experience, one of our participants had the experience with a different viewpoint, feeling somewhat alienated from the group and wanting to let us know that she didn't feel like maybe that she got the same attention or respect or listening that some of the rest of the people in the group did. So that, I think, is something for us all to be aware of.
Thank you. Yes, it's a skill we need to build, all of us. We're still working on it. Anyone else? All right. Well, we are about to conclude, and so I will leave you with a quick note. First of all, we're very interested in being here at the college, at the university. And it's an opportunity for everyone in this room. The Kettering approach is a research-based approach, and we thought that it was a premise and a path that matched so well with League, because we do so many studies and we do so much research. But the Kettering Institute, actually, they're totally scientific and research-based, because Charles Kettering in Dayton, Ohio invented the automatic ignition switch. And this was at a time at the turn of the last century when there was great industrial innovation in Dayton. The Wright brothers, the list is endless. And so for them, they have taken a scientific approach to what does it take to make democracy work. Thus, all the paperwork, all the research, we just dove in, as you can imagine, with both feet and a couple of hands too. So we apologize if we've overwhelmed you with paper. That was not our intent. In fact, to the point that there were a lot of things we didn't print for you, and we're going to send it to you next. So one of the things we wanted to leave you with was an opportunity to jumpstart this work with the university if that meets your needs. Kettering has released 2 issue guides, the one on the opioid epidemic and the other one on immigration. And we have looked at them both, and they're both worthy of conversation. So if these are topics that would interest this group, we're sending them to you, we're sending the links. So that's one thing we wanted to do to help you move this along. So we thank you for your attendance and your great attentiveness and engagement today. We know that we've left you with a lot to think about.